The business proposition. Sophia Chen stared at the eviction notice taped to her gallery door, her hands trembling as she read the bold red letters for the third time. 30 days. That's all she had left before everything her grandmother had built would be gone forever. The Chen Gallery had been a beacon in the arts district for 40 years. But 3 months of mounting debt and dwindling sales had finally caught up with her. She unlocked the door and stepped inside, breathing in the familiar scent of paint and aged wood. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the carefully curated paintings that lined the walls. Each piece told a story, held memories, represented dreams of struggling artists who trusted her to showcase their work. Now she would have to call them all, explain that their safe haven was disappearing. The bell above the door chimed, and Sophia looked up to see a man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit. He was tall, with dark hair touched by silver at the temples and eyes the color of storm clouds. Everything about him spoke of wealth and control. From his Italian leather shoes to the way he carried himself with quiet authority. Ms. Chen. His voice was deep, measured.
I'm Marcus Blackwood.
I believe my assistant called about a private meeting. Sophia nodded, remembering the cryptic phone call from yesterday. She'd assumed he was another collector looking to buy art. At desperate prices? Please, come in. Though I should warn you, if you're here to discuss purchasing pieces, I'm afraid the gallery's future is ... uncertain. Marcus glanced around the space with what seemed like genuine appreciation before his gaze returned to her. Actually, I'm here to discuss a different kind of arrangement, one that would solve both of our problems. There was something in his tone that made Sophia pause. She gestured toward her small office in the back, leading him past paintings that had once represented hope and now felt like monuments to her failure. I need a wife, Marcus said without preamble, once they were seated across from her cluttered desk. Not for love or companionship, for legal purposes. Sophia blinked, certain she'd misheard. I'm sorry, what? My father's will contains a clause requiring me to be married before my 35th birthday to inherit his estate. That birthday is in 6 months. His expression remained neutral, as if discussing stock prices rather than marriage. My lawyers have found no way around it. You're telling me this because you need money and I need a wife. I'm proposing a business contract. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a leather portfolio. 6 months of marriage. We would receive $2 million immediately upon signing, with another $3 million when we divorce. Enough to save your gallery and establish a substantial trust for its future. Sophia's world tilted. $5 million. The number echoed in her mind like a prayer answered by the wrong deity. You can't be serious. I researched your situation thoroughly, Ms. Chen. Your grandmother left you this gallery along with considerable debt. You've been struggling alone. For 2 years, taking no salary, selling your personal belongings to keep the doors open. You're weeks away from losing everything she worked to build. Heat flushed her cheeks. Having her desperation laid out so clinically felt like being dissected. And what makes you think I'd agree to something like this? For the first time, his controlled facade cracked slightly. Because you love this place. When because I believe. You're someone who honors commitments, even difficult ones. Sophia looked around her office, taking in the photos of her grandmother at gallery openings. The wall covered with thank you notes from artists whose careers had been launched from this very space. Everything she'd ever cared about hung in the balance. What would be expected of me? Attend social functions as my wife, live in my home, present a convincing marriage to the outside world. Nothing more. His gray eyes met hers steadily.
This
would be purely professional. The contract he slid across her desk was thick, filled with legal language that made her head spin. But the numbers were clear enough. $2 million immediately. $3 million upon divorce. Her gallery saved. Her grandmother's legacy preserved. I need time to think. Of course, but Ms. Chen. Marcus stood, straightening his jacket. Don't wait. Too long. Your 30 days will become 29 tomorrow. After he left, Sophia sat alone among the paintings, wondering if she was about to make the best decision of her life or sell her soul to save her grandmother's dream. Unexpected intimacy, the helicopter's blades slowed to a stop as they landed at the private resort nestled high in the Swiss Alps. Sophia pressed her face to the window, watching snow-capped peaks pierce the afternoon sky like ancient cathedrals. She'd signed Marcus's contract 3 days ago, and their courthouse wedding had been as clinical as their initial meeting to signatures. 2 witnesses his lawyer had provided, and a handshake that sealed their business arrangement. "The cabin has everything we need," Marcus said, his voice barely audible over the dying engine. "I have calls scheduled throughout the afternoon, and there's a spa appointment arranged for you at 4. Even on their honeymoon, he was scheduling their separation." Sophia nodded, clutching her small suitcase. She'd packed light. Unsure what one wore for a fake honeymoon with a stranger who happened to be her husband, the cabin was breathtaking. Exposed beams and floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the dramatic mountain landscape. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, and everything spoke of understated luxury. Yet Marcus immediately retreated to what she assumed was his study. Closing the door behind him, Sophia explored their temporary home, finding her bedroom, thankfully, separate from his and unpacking the few belongings she'd brought. Through the window, she watched the sun begin its descent behind the peaks. Painting the snow in shades of gold and rose, the spa appointment was a welcome distraction, though. She felt guilty about the expense. Every luxury Marcus provided reminded her that this was all pretend, that she was essentially an employee on a very expensive business trip. She returned to the cabin as evening settled over the mountains, expecting to find Marcus still locked away with his work. Instead, she discovered him in the kitchen, looking frustrated as he stared at an unresponsive coffee machine. "The power has been out for about an hour," he said without looking up. "Generators running the essentials, but apparently French press coffee isn't considered essential." "I can make coffee without electricity," Sophia offered. "My grandmother taught me to make it over an open flame when I was young." For the first time since she'd met him, Marcus looked genuinely interested in something she had to say. "You know how to do that?" 20 minutes later, they sat on the cabin's expansive deck, wrapped in thick blankets and sharing coffee that tasted of smoke and mountain air. The power outage had plunged the valley into darkness, revealing a canopy of stars more brilliant than anything Sophia had ever seen. "I'd forgotten," Marcus said quietly, his usual controlled tone softened by the night air. "Forgotten what?" "How quiet it gets without all the noise." He gestured vaguely toward the dark cabin. No phones buzzing, no emails demanding immediate responses. Just ... silence. Sophia studied his profile in the starlight. Without the armor of his business suit and office setting, he looked younger somehow, more vulnerable. "When was the last time you took a real vacation?" The question seemed to hit him unexpectedly. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. 7 years ago, I was supposed to take my sister Emma to New Zealand for her college graduation. She'd been planning the trip for months, researching hiking trails and adventure tours. His voice grew distant. "She was so excited about the bungee jumping in Queenstown. Was supposed to? She was killed by a drunk driver 3 weeks before we were meant to leave." The words came out flat, matter of fact, but Sophia could hear the carefully controlled pain beneath them. "I kept the tickets for 2 years before finally throwing them away." "Marcus, I'm so sorry." He shrugged, but she caught the slight tremor in his shoulders. After that, taking time off felt wrong somehow, like I was betraying her memory by doing things she'd never get to do. They sat in comfortable silence, the weight of his confession settling between them. Sophia found herself studying this man who'd become her husband through circumstance rather than choice. The rigid businessman from her gallery had been replaced by someone raw and human. "She would have loved this," she said softly, gesturing at the star-filled sky.
Yes.
Emma collected postcards of places she wanted to visit. Mountains, oceans, ancient cities. She had this theory that collecting the images would somehow make the trips more real when she finally took them. He paused. "I donated all her postcards after the funeral. I thought keeping them would be too painful." "Maybe," Sophia said carefully, "she would have wanted you to visit those places. To see them for both of you." Marcus turned to look at her then, really look at her, and for a moment she glimpsed something unguarded in his expression. Grief, yes, but also a flicker of something that might have been hope. I never thought of it that way, the generator hummed. Softly in the background, as they shared the silence and the stars, two strangers bound by contract beginning to discover they might be something more. Walls coming down, returning to Marcus's penthouse in Manhattan, felt like stepping into a different world. The sprawling apartment occupied the top 2 floors of a glass tower, all clean lines and expensive art that looked like it had been chosen by an interior designer rather than someone who actually lived there. Sophia stood in the foyer, her single suitcase dwarfed by the marble expanse, feeling like an intruder in a museum. "Your room is down the hall," Marcus said, already checking his phone. "Mrs. Rodriguez comes in daily to manage the household. I've left her instructions about your preferences." And just like that, the man who had shared coffee and starlight with her in Switzerland disappeared, replaced by the distant businessman who'd first walked into her gallery. The transition was so complete it made Sophia wonder if she'd imagined their moment of connection. The weeks that followed established a routine that felt more like polite cohabitation than marriage. Marcus left early for his tech company's headquarters, returning after she'd already eaten dinner, so they moved around each other like careful dancers, sharing space but never truly occupying it together. The only evidence of their Swiss intimacy was the way he sometimes paused when passing her in the hallway, as if remembering something he'd temporarily forgotten. Sophia threw herself into revitalizing her gallery. With the immediate financial pressure lifted, she could focus on what she loved, discovering new artists, curating exhibitions that told stories rather than simply filled wall space. She was preparing for her first major show since the marriage went. Marcus surprised her by appearing at the gallery one Thursday afternoon. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion," he said, looking oddly formal in her space. "I was curious about your work." She led him through the exhibition she was installing, a collection of photographs by a young immigrant artist who captured the hidden beauty in urban decay. Marcus studied each piece with genuine attention, asking thoughtful questions about technique and meaning. When he paused before a photograph of graffitied hands reaching toward a painted sky, something shifted in his expression. "This one," he said quietly. "It reminds me of something Emma used to say. She believed every broken thing contained the possibility of becoming something beautiful." She sounds like she was wise. She was 19. His voice carried that familiar note of carefully controlled grief. "Sometimes I think she understood more about life in her 19 years than I have in 34. That evening, for the first time since their return, Marcus didn't disappear into his study after dinner. Instead, he lingered in the kitchen where Sophia was cleaning up, rolling up his sleeves to help dry dishes, a task she suspected he hadn't done in years. "The exhibition is beautiful," he said, carefully drying a wine glass. "Your artist has real talent. Matteo's work deserves a wider audience. This show could change his life if the right people see it. Then we'll make sure they do." Marcus set down the glass and turned to face her. "I'd like to attend the opening, as your husband, but also as someone who appreciates what you've created." The opening night arrived with October's first frost, and Sophia found herself nervous in a way she hadn't expected. She'd organized dozens of gallery events, but having Marcus there, really there, not just fulfilling a contractual obligation, felt different. He arrived early, impeccably dressed in a navy suit that made his gray eyes look like storm clouds, and spent the evening engaging with artists and collectors with surprising warmth. She was discussing a potential commission with a buyer when she heard a commotion near the back of the gallery. Turning, she saw Marcus gripping the edge of a table, his face pale and his breathing rapid and shallow.
God.
Several people had gathered around him, their concerned voices creating a buzz of confusion. Without thinking, Sophia excused herself and pushed through the small crowd. "Please, give him some space," she said firmly, taking Marcus's arm. "It's okay, everyone. He just needs some air." She guided him to her office, closing the door against the curious stares. Marcus sank into a chair, his hands shaking as he loosened. "His tie? I'm sorry," he managed between labored breaths. "This is ... embarrassing." "There's nothing embarrassing about a panic attack," Sophia said gently, kneeling beside his chair. "Just focus on breathing. In through your nose, out through your mouth. That's it. She stayed with him as his breathing slowly returned to normal, her hand resting lightly on his arm. When the worst had passed, he looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. How did you know what it was? I've had them. After my grandmother died, when I realized how much debt she'd hidden from me, the fear that I'd lose everything she'd worked for, it was overwhelming sometimes. Nodded slowly. Mine started after Emma died. Crowded places, unexpected sounds. My therapist says it's a normal response to trauma, but knowing that doesn't make it easier. You're in therapy? Twice a week for the past 5 years? Not as put together as I pretend to be, Sophia? He met her eyes directly. Thought. You should know that about your husband. Something in the way he said husband made her heart skip. Not the clinical way he'd referenced their arrangement before, but as if the word meant something real, something chosen rather than contracted. We all have things we're healing from, she said softly. That doesn't make you broken, Marcus. It makes you human. Later, after the gallery had emptied and they'd returned to the penthouse, Marcus appeared in the kitchen where Sophia was making tea. Thank you, he said. For tonight. For handling things when I couldn't? That's what partners do, she replied, then caught herself. Double quotes. I know what you meant. His smile was soft, genuine, and you're right. That is what partners do. As she headed to her room that night, Sophia realized the careful distance they'd maintained was beginning to crumble. The question was whether they were brave enough to see what lay underneath. The heart's betrayal, the morning light filtering through the penthouse windows felt different somehow, charged with the memory of the previous night's vulnerability. Sophia found Marcus in the kitchen earlier than usual, still wearing yesterday's shirt with the sleeves pushed up, looking like he hadn't slept. Coffee? He asked, holding up the pot with a tentative smile that reminded her of their night under the stars. Please. She accepted the mug, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The simple contact sent warmth up her arm that had nothing to do with the hot ceramic. This was dangerous territory. Somewhere between his panic attack and her instinctive care for him, the careful boundaries of their arrangement had begun to blur. She was supposed to be playing a role, fulfilling a contract, not feeling her pulse quicken when he looked at her like she was someone worth seeing. I wanted to apologize again for last night, Marcus said, leaning against the counter. And two. Thank you. You handled everything perfectly. Stop apologizing. You don't need to be perfect all the time, Marcus, don't I? His laugh was bitter. My investors, my board, my employees, they all expect the unflappable Marcus Blackwood who never shows weakness, never makes mistakes. Sometimes I forget there might be spaces where that's not required. This space doesn't require it, Sophia said softly. Our space. The words hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to address directly. Marcus sat down, his coffee cup with deliberate care. Sophia, I need you to know something. This arrangement we have, it's become more complicated than I intended. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Complicated how? Before he could answer, his phone buzzed insistently. He glanced at it, and his expression shifted. The vulnerable man disappearing behind familiar professional walls. I have to take this. Board meeting moved up to this morning. Was already moving toward his study. We'll talk tonight. But that night, Marcus didn't come home until after midnight, and the next morning, he was gone before Sophia woke. The pattern continued for days' brief encounters in passing. Messages left with Mrs. Rodriguez about schedule changes, the careful dance of two people avoiding a conversation that felt too dangerous to have. Sophia threw herself into gallery work, trying to ignore the growing ache in her chest. She was falling for him, had already fallen, if she was honest. The realization terrified her. This wasn't part of their deal. She was supposed to be smarter than this, more practical. But Marcus's rare smiles, his moments of unguarded honesty, the way he genuinely cared about her artist's work had all conspired to crack open her heart. When she'd meant to keep it safely locked away, the breaking point came on a rainy Thursday evening. Sophia was working late at the gallery when she overheard a phone conversation that shattered her carefully constructed hopes. Marcus had arrived unexpectedly. taking a call in the main gallery space while she organized files in the back office. His voice carried clearly through the partially open door. The marriage is working exactly as planned, Richard. 6 months, clean divorce, inheritance secured. She's been very professional about the whole arrangement. Sophia's hand stilled on the papers she'd been sorting. Professional, the word cut through her like ice. No complications? Voice on speakerphone, his lawyer, she realized, sounded pleased. Some of these contract marriages can get messy if emotions become involved. Sophia understands this is business, Marcus replied coolly. She's been perfect for what we needed, grateful for the financial arrangement, attractive enough to be believable and smart enough not to expect more than what was agreed upon. Each word was a knife twist. Grateful, attractive enough, not expecting more. She pressed her hand to her mouth to keep from making a sound that would reveal her presence. Excellent. Then we're on track for the divorce proceedings to begin in 6 weeks. The inheritance should transfer immediately after. That's the plan. Sophia waited until she heard Marcus leave before allowing herself to fall apart. Sitting on the floor of her office, surrounded by files and dreams, she let the tears come. How had she been so foolish? Their moments of connection, his vulnerability. The way he'd looked at her after the panic attack, all of it had been in her imagination. Wishful thinking from a woman desperate to believe in fairy tales. She avoided him for 3 days, leaving early and returning late, communicating only through Mrs. Rodriguez about logistics. But Manhattan wasn't big enough for 2 people determined to avoid each other, and on Sunday morning, she found him waiting in the kitchen, looking haggard. "Oh, we need to talk," he said, without preamble. "About what?" "The business arrangement is proceeding perfectly, isn't it?" She couldn't keep the ice from her voice. Marcus flinched. "Sophia, what's wrong? You've been avoiding me all week." "I heard your conversation with Richard. Thursday night at the gallery." She met his eyes directly, proud that her voice remained steady. It was illuminating. Understanding dawned in his expression, followed by something that might have been pain. "You heard, ... double quotes, that I've been very professional, that I'm attractive enough to be believable. I'm grateful and smart enough not to expect more." She grabbed her purse from the counter. "Don't worry, Marcus. I understand exactly where we stand. I won't make the mistake of forgetting this is business again." Sophia waited, but she was already gone, leaving him standing alone in the kitchen that had briefly felt like home. Outside, the city noise couldn't drown out the sound of her heart breaking, or the terrible knowledge that she'd done exactly what she'd promised herself she wouldn't do. She'd fallen in love with a man who saw her as nothing more than a beautifully executed contract. The cruelest part was that for a few precious moments, she'd thought he might be falling too. Breaking the contract, 3 weeks passed in a haze of careful politeness and aching silence. Sophia and Marcus moved through their shared space like ghosts, acknowledging each other with nods and brief pleasantries that felt more painful than outright conflict. She threw herself into preparing for her biggest exhibition yet, a retrospective celebrating her grandmother's 40 years in the art world, featuring pieces from the gallery's permanent collection alongside works by artists her grandmother had championed. Marcus, meanwhile, seemed to work even longer hours. Leaving before dawn and returning after Sophia had gone to bed, the few times their paths crossed, she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher, something that looked almost like longing. But she'd learned not to trust her interpretation of his moods. 2 days before the exhibition opening, Sophia stood alone in the gallery at midnight, making final adjustments to the lighting. The space had been transformed into a loving tribute to her grandmother's legacy, each piece carefully positioned to tell the story of a woman who had dedicated her life to nurturing artists and preserving beauty. The bell above the door chimed softly, and she turned to see Marcus silhouetted against the streetlights. He looked tired, his usually perfect hair disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. "The security system showed you were still here," he said quietly. "Late, just finishing up?" She turned back to adjusting a spotlight, desperate to avoid looking at him directly. "The opening is tomorrow. I've had it in my calendar for weeks." Something in his tone made her pause. "You don't need to attend, Marcus. I know this exhibition isn't exactly high profile enough for your social obligations. Social obligations. He stepped closer, and she could hear the hurt in his voice. Sophia, this isn't about obligations. It's about celebrating something that matters to you. Don't. The word came out sharper than she'd intended. Please don't pretend this is personal when we both know it's not. Is that what you think? Marcus moved around the display case separating them, his gray eyes intense in the gallery's dramatic lighting. That none of this is personal for me. I think you've been very clear about what this arrangement means to you. I heard you tell Richard. Forget what I told Richard. His voice was rough, desperate. That conversation. I was lying to him, Sophia. I was lying to myself. She finally looked at him fully, seeing the vulnerability she'd glimpsed only in rare moments. What are you talking about? I told Richard what I thought I was supposed to feel. What would keep things simple and safe? But the truth is, I stopped thinking of you as part of a business arrangement weeks ago. He ran a hand through his hair, messing it further. Maybe even that first night in Switzerland. When you made coffee over the fire and listened to me talk about Emma without judgment or pity, Sophia's carefully guarded heart began to crack. Marcus, ... I fell in love with you somewhere between your gallery opening and the morning you made sure. I wasn't alone after my panic attack, and it terrifies me. His admission hung in the air. Between them, like a bridge neither was sure they could cross. After Emma died, I promised myself I wouldn't let anyone else matter that much. The risk of loss felt too great. So you pushed me away. I tried to. But you're not someone who can be easily pushed away, Sophia of Chend. You're stubborn and passionate, and you see beauty in broken things. His smile was soft, wondering. You made me want to be brave again, the tears she'd been holding back for. Weeks finally spilled over. I thought I was just playing a role for you, a convenient wife who wouldn't complicate your life. You've complicated everything, Marcus said, stepping close enough to touch her face gently. And I've never been more grateful for complications in my life. The contract can be torn up. The inheritance, the timeline, all of it, none of it matters if I lose you. His thumb brushed away her tears. I know I've handled this terribly. I know I hurt you by trying to protect myself. But if you're willing to take a risk on a man who's still learning how to be vulnerable, I'd like to try something new. What kind of something? A real marriage? Real partnership? Real love, if you'll have me? Instead of answering with words. Sophia reached up and kissed him, pouring 3 weeks of longing and hurt and hope into the connection. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. The exhibition opening tomorrow, she whispered against his lips. What about it? I want you there. It's not as my contract husband, but as the man I love. Marcus's smile was radiant, transforming his entire face. I wouldn't miss it for the world. The next evening, the gallery buzzed with energy as collectors, artists, and art lovers filled the space. Sophia moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and sharing stories about her grandmother's legacy. But her attention kept drifting to Marcus, who had positioned himself near her grandmother's photograph, greeting guests, and speaking knowledgeably about the collection, as if he'd studied every piece. When the formal presentation began, Marcus surprised her by stepping forward to address the crowd. Most of you know me as Sophia's husband, he began, his voice carrying easily through the space. But what you might not know is that before I met her, I had forgotten how to see beauty in the world. Sophia Chen doesn't just curate art, she curates hope, connection, and the belief that every broken thing can be made whole again. His eyes found hers across the room. She saved my life by teaching me that love isn't a risk to be managed, but a gift to be embraced. Legacy she's preserving? It's proof that some things are worth fighting for. Later, after the guests had gone and they'd cleaned up together, Sophia and Marcus stood before her grandmother's photograph. She would have liked you, Sophia said, leaning into his warmth. Even though I married her granddaughter for money, especially because you fell in love with her anyway. Marcus turned her in his arms, his expression serious. No more contracts between us. No more walls. Just us, figuring it out as we go. Just us, she agreed and kissed the man who had started as a stranger, become her husband by contract and chosen to stay for love, Outside, the city hummed with life, but inside the gallery, surrounded by art and memories and possibility, Sophia and Marcus began writing the first chapter of a story that was entirely their own.